Imagine you're on the beach with your 3-year-old daughter. She's having fun in the waves, frolicking in the sand. But a rogue wave comes and pulls her out to sea. You see her floundering there. You're faced with a choice. But then out of the corner of your eye, you see 2 other gentlemen, the opposite direction. They're also going down, being caught in the same wave. Do you save the 2 gentlemen? Or do you save the daughter? This is the choice that we are faced with the resolution that has been presented or given to us. And as the government, as the leader of the government team, I am going to argue that this House prefers deontology to consequentialism. This House prefers deontology. To better understand the resolution before us, let us take a moment to define the terms. So under resolutional analysis, let's take a look at definitions. I would like to propose that deontology is doing what's right because it's right. It's not concerned necessarily with the impacts or weighing out what might happen. It's saying, we know what's right, let's do it. This is opposed to the idea of consequentialism. Consequentialism is the theory that the ends justify the means. It's looking to the impacts, looking to what might happen and saying, you know what, we're going to save the 2 rather than the 1 because 2 is better than 1, right? Now let's move on to some argumentation.
Are you going to be supporting a specific theory of deontology, such as Kant's Categorical Imperative, or are you just going to be looking at lots of different theories for deontology?
We're going to be looking at deontology from a broad perspective. Professor Blackburn may narrow it down depending. But now let's move on to the arguments for deontology. We're going to be looking at reasons why deontology is valid and why it is preferred. Why at the end of this debate you're going to be putting your vote for deontology. The first argument we can make for deontology is that it is universal. It applies to everyone, everywhere, at all times. We all have a sense of what is good and what is bad. Ever since the Garden of Eden, we all have this intuition. We know something's wrong, and maybe we choose to do it anyway. This applies to everyone. We can all find or all have a deontological perspective. The second one is we have a duty to do what is right. When Nathan Hale, an American spy, was hanged, he says, I regret that I have one life to give for my country. He realized his duty was to protect his country and to do whatever he could to protect the country. Likewise, we have a duty. We have a duty to the truth, to supporting what's right. This goes back to the definition. We're doing right simply for the sake of doing right. We're not weighing the consequences and having to make these choices. We're saying, we know what's right, let's do it. It was prescribed to us, it was given to us, we're going to do what's right. The third argument we can make is that it is for life. It does not make people simply a means to an end. Rather, it takes people and it values them for who they are. This means that we look at life, when we look at life from a deontological perspective, we are looking at people as being intrinsic worth in and of themselves. We're not putting a price on people's heads. We're not saying you're worth $250,000. We're saying you are alive and you are special because of that. When we come to situations such as euthanasia and we're faced with a choice, we choose to value life rather than to weigh the consequences. Even though it might be painful, even though they might be going through hard times, we're saying, you know what? They have a life and it is intrinsically good. We know that it's wrong to kill. We know that it's wrong to murder, and so we won't. The second argument under this is that people are no longer a means to an end. We can actually have real emotions, real feelings. We can love other people. Rather than seeing people as a means, rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to do something nice for them or I'm going to help them out, because later on it will come back and help me out favorably, we'll do it just because it's right, just because it's the right thing to do. The fourth argument that we can make is it is what we know. When we look at life through a consequentialist perspective, we are basing our judgments on what might happen. None of us here are God. We cannot know the future. We can only make guesses or predictions, and guesses or predictions are just that. They are not certain, they are not absolute. So even though we might think it's going to be a good thing later on down the road, we can't really know. Do we want to invest into a system that is not based on absolutes, but rather bases its foundation on a shaky ground your point.
If you're saying that in deontology you know exactly what's right and what's going to happen, in the case of your daughter being swept away in the ocean versus and whether you're going to save the two guys or the one daughter, how do you know which one's going to be better? Couldn't you say that even in a deontological decision, you can't know the outcome of either choice?
We can't know the outcome, but we know that one is our daughter. We're going to save our daughter. And I'm going to get onto this further down.
Why is that better?
Why is that better?
To save your daughter.
It's our duty. What, I mean, sure, there's two people, possibly drowning out there. Maybe they're going to be able to overcome the waves and swim to safety. We don't know that. But why should we save two strangers rather than our own 3-year-old daughter? Once again, are we going to do it based on what might happen, or are we going to do it because we know it is our duty? The fifth argument that we can make is it supports the individual. It supports the individual. If we have minority rights coming into conflict with the majority, we're going to say, you know what? Minorities, or whatever it may be, individuals still have rights. So we might say it's good to kill this one life to save the many. Or maybe we can look at the example of torture. We're going to torture this person, do inhumane things to them, violate all kinds of standards and ethical duties just to maybe save millions. From a consequentialist perspective, you would say that's perfectly fine because we have the possibility of ending the strife, of maybe figuring out the secret access code to the nuclear, missile. A deontologist says, you know what? The individual has rights. If we look to our own government, we see we have due process. If we're concerned about justice, we're not just concerned about achieving justice, but we're concerned about how that justice is achieved, the due process. And that's why we have courts. That's why you're, not allowed to condemn yourself. That's why you're allowed a jury by peers. Now that we've covered reasons why to prefer a deontological perspective.
7 minutes.
8 minutes.
7 minutes for games. I'll give you 8 minutes. Go for it.
All right. Now let's take a look at reasons why consequentialism is bad. And I've already reviewed this. First of all, we can't know the future. Second of all, it wills evil. It says it's okay to murder. It says it's okay to lie just because the ends justify the means. And finally, as Caleb got up here and he was asking, it is indifferent to our own interests. We all have interests. If my little girl is drowning on the beach, it is my interest, it is my personal interest to go out and do all that I can to save her life. That is my interest, and that is what, from a deontological perspective, is my duty. I know that I'm going to do it because it's my duty. So we go back to that example, we can look through to the perspective, and at the end of the day, you're going to be casting your ballot for a deontological perspective because you are, in the end, you're doing what's right.
Should we teach them the debate clap? Debate clap? You're up there.
So Stephen was saying that the debate clap is not entertainment. Here, so a healthy level of audience participation, whether peer-hears or shame, and heckles, is really appreciated. Actually, okay, great job, Jacob. Very, very eloquent.
Can I ask you a procedural?
Sure thing.
How, I know you guys.
Sure, you are allowed to ask questions or make arguments in 15 seconds or less, just not in the first or the last minute. So if you guys kind of keep track, maybe Jacob can kind of let you know, or if you just ask a question, I'll say, hey, you're on the correct second time right now. So just not on my first minute or not on my last minute of my speech, 8 minutes.
But I can ask you to clarify.
Exactly.
Or challenge something.
During the speech, not the first minute or the last minute. You got it?
Thank you. That's helpful information. I wasn't made privy of.
Yeah, definitely across the frame here who's debating a parliamentary equal time for the first part. Right. Here we go. Ready?
Do you
Yep.
have 9 minutes since we took
I might take you on that off because we're running out of time. All right, I have a question for everybody. What is the shortest distance between any 2 points? Jack Bauer. Yes, that's right. Jack Bauer, no matter what kind of situation it's 24, he's able to get there quicker, faster, stronger than anybody else. If you are a 24 fan, you are going to be voting for us today, because when there's a nuclear bomb about to detonate and kill millions of people, Jack Bauer is going to do whatever he has to do. Whether that's lie, to pretend he's a terrorist, even pretend to torture the terrorist family in order to take away those nuclear weapons and save the millions of people. We absolutely believe that is the fundamental right thing to do, and we believe that's a reductio ad absurdum to their case, because Fred is more concerned about his conscience and not telling a lie, because that would be the morally incorrect thing to do, than saving millions of people. For that argument alone, we're going to be winning the debate. Even Kant once said, better the world shall perish, one of the biggest deontologists, than I commit an act of injustice. So Kant would rather the entire world perish than tell a lie. If you think there's something wrong with that, you're going to be voting for us today. So let's go into a couple definitional disputes here. We'll accept your general definition of deontology, but when it comes to consequentialism, we'd like to propose a more specific contemporary view of consequentialism, and that is indirect naturalistic consequentialism, which is defined as such by Richard Boyd. Good is defined by whatever actions, policies, character traits, and the like are likely to promote well-being, okay? So whatever actions, character traits, and policies are the like are likely to promote well-being. Now, a couple of points evident in this definition. Number one, we really care about promoting individual well-being and social well-being, because whatever promotes well-being is what is good, okay? And then again, the basic idea is that as individuals, we are doing our best to promote the well-being of individuals and those in society at large. Question, sir?
What happens when individual and social well-being come into conflict?
We're going to talk about that, as the first response is always going to be to try to mitigate that conflict, but I will respond that in depth when I get to your argumentation. So let's go to my first counter-contention, and that is that everybody is a consequentialist. Everybody is a consequentialist, including my dear friend Fred here, who thinks that all consequentialists are sons of Satan. But even Fred himself is a consequentialist. So my first sub-point is that consequentialism is evident with an individual practical reflection. When you are reflecting practically, hey, should I do my homework tonight, or should I just go to sleep? I'm really tired. What you end up doing are outweighing the advantages and the disadvantages. Well, if I do my homework, I'll probably get a good homework grade, but if I go to sleep, maybe I'll be better prepared for that group presentation, right? So in your individual practical reflection, since you care about yourself and you care about others, what you're naturally doing is trying to weigh the costs and the benefits, or the likely consequences, and whether or not it's going to promote well-being in your life. So you are all consequentialists if you've ever had to make a decision ever before in your life, right? The second sub-point here is that consequentialism is evident within societal practical reflection. What do societies do, right? As politicians, we try to create policies that are going to promote well-being in society. We see a social harm, and we say, what can we do to remedy this social harm? Well, that is consequentialism in essence. We just watched in rhetorical criticism a video, Coney 2012, and maybe you've been familiar with that. That's exactly what they were doing in Coney 2012. They were saying, listen, these children are suffering from forced child slavery in Uganda, so what do we need to do? We need to put political pressure. We need to create actions to help people, to promote the well-being of these children. If that makes sense to you, you're going to be voting for us today. Not at this time, so let me finish my counter-contention. My third sub-point is that deontologists as well are consequentialists, okay? Because all of these rules that they're telling you to follow, like the means that are always morally right, they're good rules because they promote well-being. You shouldn't murder. Why? Because murdering harms people, right? It kills people. It hurts well-being. You shouldn't steal, or does that hurt somebody else's well-being? And so deontologists, even when you're going through this categorical imperative of Kant, for example, and you're deciding, hey, is this rule universalizable? Can I will that everybody would do that? So let's say, hey, should everybody go to college? Well, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to say, well, would everybody going to college promote well-being, or would that harm their well-being? So even when you're engaging in a categorical imperative, you're engaging in that cost-benefits analysis of how it's going to affect the well-being of people. Let's go to the third sub-point here, even the golden rule. The golden rule says love others as you have them love yourself, right? Well, implicit within that is a concern for others' well-being, so even that is consequentialist in nature. Let's go next to virtue ethics and Aristotle. Aristotle, basically, if you look at all these virtues, they're all regulated by this concern for your own well-being and the well-being of others. Like if you look at prudence, the prudent man, that's one virtue, or woman, is one who's able to reason wisely or advantageously about yourself and do things like, hey, do your homework, get enough sleep, that are going to be prudent for your life, and that promotes your well-being. The same thing for the other minded virtues like friendship and being friendly to other people. Being friendly that's a good virtue because it promotes the well-being of others. When you create a good sociable environment or a friendly environment, that helps to promote the well-being of others rather than harming the well-being of others. So that is consequentialist in nature. So in sum, All moral theories that tell you that there is a right or wrong are consequentialist in nature. Let's go to our counter contention number 2 here, is that there are certain major problems with deontology. The first is that it's completely impractical. It's completely impractical, okay? So if we take a rule like this, should everybody kind of give to the poor or something like that, and we go through to Kant's categorical imperative and say, hey, can we universalize that everybody should give to the poor or everybody should not give to the poor? Well, in some ways, like you might think that, hey, everybody giving to the poor would be a good thing. In some ways, you might think that everybody giving to the poor would be a really bad thing because maybe you'd lose all your money. So it's really impractical, and a lot of times there's no real definitive rule that you should follow when you engage in that practical reasoning. So we think that it's a very impractical form of reasoning. Number 2, we believe that it's way too rational, okay? So just in the cafeteria, a young lady who had a disability asked me for a cup of ice. Now, am I going to step back as a Kantian and say, I wonder, would I will that everybody in my given situation should give this girl a cup of ice? I mean, that's completely ridiculous. Why do you give a girl a cup of ice? It's because you care for that girl's well-being and you're naturally empathetic for her, right? Why did somebody stop and help me when I had a broken arm? Because they cared for me. I'm certainly glad they weren't a Kantian and saying, can I universalize this for everybody? So we believe that deontology has some major problems. Let's go to their arguments for deontology. Number 1, they said that good is known by everybody. My counter-contention, this is like relativism. Who's good? Good for animals, good for this society, good for that society. What's good in one society or subculture isn't good in another society. So they're just kind of begging the question on whether or not there are these universalizable rules. Number 2 is that they say that you're in your duty to do what's good. My question is why? And this is one of the fundamental questions that they're not answering for deontology, and that's they're not giving you a meta-ethical or normative justification for that view. Every single ethical theory has to tell you why what they're defining as good is good. Why is following that rule good? They never give you an answer to that question. And consequentialism does tell you why promoting well-being is good, because we care about our own well-being and the well-being of others. So it's within your own psychology that it is good. So there is a meta-ethical justification while they don't have one. So their system isn't as well thought through as ours is. Let's go to the next one about the fact that they said that, we're devaluing life. And here's the thing. Or sort of that they're valuing life, for example, while we're not valuing life. But so is consequentialism. Remember, consequentialism is valuing the well-being of others. And we actually do it better than they do, because when I'm in the cafeteria and I'm wondering whether or not to help that young lady who wants a cup of ice, right? I immediately help her while the Kantian sits back and engages in practical reflection, which may end up helping her, may end up not helping her. So we actually value individuals better. To answer Jacob's introduction about, do I save the young lady or my daughter, or do I save the 2 people who are drowning? And that was his question to me as well. What you do is, number 1, you try to mitigate the conflict of interest. So what I mean by that is you go ask a lifeguard to go save the 2 people, and you go save your daughter, so we save everybody. That's really a misunderstanding and a straw man of consequentialism in the sense that you're going to have to kill your daughter to go save 2 other people. No. The consequentialist, remember, doesn't want to harm anybody's well-being. You want to help everybody's well-being, and you're going to engage in good policy making in order to help everybody's well-being. They said that you're not treating people as a means to an end. I'll take your question if you give me another minute.
Go ahead. How can you accomplish everybody's well-being if there's conflict of interest?
Again, I think the whole purpose, they kind of give you a basic understanding of what consequentialism is, that you're trying to promote everybody's well-being, including yourself. And it's just real common sense. You do your best to do that, and consequentialism says you work it out. So in that situation, when you have your daughter drowning, you have 2 lifeguards drowning, well, I say, hey, Caleb, can you go help get those 2 guys? Hey, can you go help that person? Well, I go get my daughter. They're assuming that they're always trying to push you into these extreme situations that don't exist. There's always a way to mitigate those conflicts of interest. Let's go to the problem of prediction that they were talking about. You can never predict if it's going to have a good consequence. Now, let me ask you folks, this is common sense, okay? If you don't drink water for the next week, is that going to harm your well-being? If you go step in front of train tracks, is that going to harm your well-being? I think we can predict pretty clearly what's going to happen to your well-being if you don't drink water or if you don't do your homework in my rhetorical criticism class. Not going to be too good for your academic well-being there, right? But now here's the thing, they're also mischaracterizing our indirect consequentialism, because they're kind of looking at more of a direct consequentialism that says that, hey, you need to do whatever is going to be objectively good for the entire future of the world from a God's-eye perspective. That's not what indirect consequentialism says. Indirect consequentialism says that you do the best with the equipment, the finite equipment that you have, to figure out how you can promote well-being, and you do your best to understand individual well-being. Now, they say they support the individual. Well, what happens when a Nazi comes knock at your door and you have some Jewish people in the attic, and you're under their question? Well, they say it would be wrong to lie. It'd be rather tell them you have some Jewish people so the Nazis can go kill them. That's what they're telling you. We say, no, you should better lie in that case. I'm telling you that. San Diego Christian, you better lie, folks, to save those Jews up in the place. So who really cares about the individual there? Them or us? I'll let you think about that one. And finally, they were talking about why consequentialism bad. They were talking about willing evil. Again, my first point is this, that this is really a misunderstanding of what consequentialism is, because consequentialism does not want to will evil. It wants to care for well-being and promote well-being as much as possible. Where is willing evil in that? When we care for ourselves and we care for others. And number two, you're always going to be trying to mitigate those problems, like what he mentioned with the daughter in drowning. You want to find ways so that you don't get into these situations where you can't care for everybody's well-being. So in the end, folks, go back to Jack Bauer. And if a nuclear bomb is going to be detonated, are you going to not tell lies just because you're narcissistic and you want to keep your own moral house in order and you don't want to feel bad about telling a lie? Or are you going to save millions of lives by pretending to be a terrorist so you can use the bomb?
That was like
At
10
the end of the
minutes.
day.
There's a lot of information.
Wow, that's all I have to say. I've never been part of something like this before, and you are good. That's very good. And I think what's appropriate is I'm supposed to respond to his criticisms. So I'm just going to start right off the get-go. He starts with the claim that everyone is a consequentialist. This is obviously a projection. And it's to make them feel better, this idea that everyone's doing it, it's the way we do things in the world today, it's a very modern, progressive way of thinking. He says, why do you serve God? I mean, it sounds like the reason he's serving God is for fire insurance and to get more tools in his crown, right? And that is not the motivation that is why you should serve God. You should serve God because you love him and for what he's done for you, not because of what you can give out of it. Can you imagine if you applied that to human relationship? If you treated your spouse or your children on a consequentialist basis, that you rewarded them for these good behaviors and punished them for evil behaviors, that you're doing it for their own good because you're trying to maximize good returns. But it's a very twisted, very narrow way of viewing things. Secondly, he says,
So wouldn't that very point prove
we're still in the
that-
first minute, aren't we?
Oh, we are? I apologize.
In deontology, rules are rules because they are in people's best interest. He's basically flipped the whole thing on its end. He's acting like the reason deontologists came up with certain rules of right conduct is because in the end it helps the majority or the most people out. That might be a positive consequence of the rules, but that's not why the rules were made. Consequentialists believe you can break the rules if it's for the greater good. So even though there might be rules in consequentialism, like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not torture, thou shalt not commit adultery, if committing any of those acts in your mind, you can reason and project and calculate, and believe me, my reason can calculate reasons for all those things, then you can do it if it will bring about the greater good. So it makes rules meaningless because it all has to do with your own calculations and projections. Next, deontology is impractical. He talks about, are we supposed to help all the poor or just help people with broken arms, or do we have to help people that want a cup of ice? Well, Josh has made a classical error in that he's confused the hypothetical imperative with the categorical imperative. The hypothetical imperative simply says, if in order to do this, I have to do A, B, C, and D. But the categorical imperative is a universal concept where you ask yourself, would I want all people in all places and all times to do what I'm about to do? That doesn't apply if you go to Baskin-Robbins and are trying to figure out between butterscotch and chocolate ice cream. It does apply if it talks about would I want all people in all places at all times to lie, like his Nazi example. Yes, Josh?
But it's really important to distinguish the fact that Kant is saying that you should do it because it's the rational thing to do and you've gone through this rational process, not because you care for that person or have empathy for that person, but because it's in abidance with a rational rule. Would you agree?
Yes. Right, and that's another point. Deontology, at least the Kantian version he's talking about, is based on reason, which is available to anyone. If you're thinking reasonably and correctly, we would all come up with the same solutions to the activities. Let me go jump ahead to his Nazi lie scenario, where he talks about you're in Holland, you're hiding Jews, and you hear this knock on the door. And the Nazis are like, do you have Jews hiding in your house? The consequentialist would lie through their teeth, but how would you trust a consequentialist in the future? Because you know, every time it's in their best interest, or if they think they can accomplish good, they are going to lie. Truth means nothing to them. For the Kantian, truth is a duty. Now, it doesn't mean you have to tell the Nazis. You can say, you know what, you're a Nazi. I'm not telling you anything. It doesn't mean you have to say, I got Jews upstairs. Or you could distract them and say, hey, is that a Swabian accent? Why didn't you come on in? I know you're from Swabia. But you don't lie. Once you lie, you go down a road that you can't come back to. Go ahead.
And you're doing that because that would be beneficial, right? You're
doing it because it's right, not because what you can get out of it. Now, will it have benefits? Absolutely. You'll live in a world where truth matters. But the motivation is different. And that's the difference between the two. One is based on intention, the other is based on outcomes. And this is the problem. They do not know, they do not have enough knowledge to know what the outcomes will be. Now you can hope, you can do all your calculations, but the devil fools with the best laid plans, right? And you may have wanted to help others, but in that thing, when you lose the rule of law, when you lose the rule of duty, and you do just what you think is convenient, you get into big trouble. Why are some things good? First of all, because we have the categorical imperative, and that's universal, which you want all people in all places, all times to do what you're about to do. The second, and this is key, and that they completely haven't mentioned, and it's the kingdom of ends. Always treat others as an end to themselves, never as merely a means to an end. And the problem is, with consequentialism, you use people to achieve what you think might be greater for others. And that might be great for the others, even for the majority, but what about the individual? It totally desecrates individual rights. Do your best guess, sorry, that's not good enough. We're all fallen, we don't have the kind of information. The key comes down to this. The other type of deontology I noticed they didn't mention is divine command theory, where God's will, God makes the rules because God knows best. And it comes down to trusting God and obeying His commandments. You don't try to figure out a better way. You do what you're told because God told you to. Yes?
So when extreme jihadists say that Allah gives them divine command to go kill innocent men, women, and children, you're saying that would be a good rule for them to follow?
No, you said that, not me. And the point I'm trying to make is God's will, and I'll tell you this. With the jihadists and their beliefs in God, they at least have this thing that they don't switch around every time to make it convenient, like has happened in the West. Now the question is, are you following the real God? But that's a whole other debate that we're not talking about right now. Right now we're talking about if you can trust God, and for you out there, if you believe you know God, and God has revealed His will to you, and you know it's God's will, can you manipulate it in hopes of achieving a greater good? Can you cheat, steal, commit adultery, kill people, torture people in the hopes of creating good? Or if God tells you to love your neighbors yourself, do you do that because it's right and God said so? You are responsible for doing what is right. God is responsible for the consequences. Put the devil back in the box. Are we allowed to make things? I'm sorry. I don't know the protocol.
This is the high moral standard you give with deontologists, ad hominem name calling, calling other people devils, so just something about there.
Logical fallacy.
Joseph Stalin once said that a single death is a tragedy, but that a million is a statistic. And in my opinion, that is the perfection, the highest level of deontology. Because he is preferring to kill 1 million people in order to uphold the highest ideal in his mind of his own community, his government, the ideals of the nation he wants to build. In that case, 1 million people become statistical, and that's not what he's concerned about. And that's exactly what the consequentialist is concerned about. We're not worried as much about the ethical ramifications of maybe our nation's ideals or our God's ideals or our personal ethical ideals are being sacrificed. We're worried about that statistic of 1 million people and whether they're being conquered. That having been said, let's look at some of the specific things that have been addressed by both sides coming up into the round, and I'll try to make a little more sense of it. First off, let's go off case to the responses we have from Fred to what Josh Cangelosi just said. First of all, Josh Cangelosi said that everyone is a consequentialist, and Fred Blackburn came back and said that it's not good, we're not actually all consequentialists, and it's dangerous to be a consequentialist because you are projecting what you think is going to be good. You're looking into the future, and as if you're some incredible supercomputer able to calculate all the odds of what could happen, you predict the future, decide this is consequently the best thing to do. And he says that because of that, and the fact that we can't actually predict the future that closely, we should not be consequentialists. We need to go with the rule and assume that God's going to work out what happens in the future. However, if that's the case, what's being argued there is that we should never even try to predict what's going to happen in the future. We should never even try to look forward to the consequences of what our choices are going to have happen in the future. Aren't the impacts of our choices fairly predictable? If you sleep with your boyfriend before you're married and you get pregnant, wasn't that kind of predictable? If you're sleeping with a whole bunch of prostitutes all the time, aren't you going to get AIDS? Aren't you going to have, if you take drugs, aren't you going to fry your brain? These are predictable things that happen because of our choices. And if you have a situation like Jack Bauer, where you know that torturing this one person, or lying to this one person even, is going to save millions of lives, isn't it reasonable to look into the future and say, this guy knows the answer, if I lie to him and get the answer from him, I think I can save millions of lives. Shouldn't we do that? Don't we have an obligation to try to project that future? We may be wrong. There may be a 1 in a million chance that we're wrong, and we actually don't save those million lives. But if we have the odds in our favor, and we're able to say, I'm almost certainly going to save all those people by lying to this guy, I think we have an obligation to do that. And that in fact, trying to predict the future is both plausible, because we have pretty good odds of predicting it, and it's something that we need to do. That said, I think that trying to project the future and basing our decisions on the future is not only reasonable, but also necessary. Another thing Fred Blackburn said is that we are to trust God's commandments and assume that whatever he does in the future is going to be what's right, because we make a choice, he deals with the consequences. In my opinion, we are, as consequentialists, trying to say that we should follow God's word. We're trying to say that we should do what God says. For instance, God said, made the golden rule, right? God wrote the golden rule. He said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If that's one of God's rules, then if you were that Jew in the attic, and you had someone downstairs being asked by a Nazi, are there Jews in your house? What would you like them to do? What would you want them to do? Would you want them to lie to save your life? I would assume so. The alternative is that he says, yeah, there are Jews in my house, I have to tell the truth. Well, that's not respecting the golden rule, that's breaking God's rule, and that is both breaking the rules of deontology and consequentialism. That is sacrificing lives for nothing. And I find that to be a violation of human rights. Also, he said that there's an alternative. You could just avoid the question. You could just not answer it at all and say something about an accent and then invite them into your house. I think if you do that kind of thing, when you avoid the question, it's obvious that you don't want to answer it in the affirmative. If Nazis came to my house and said, do you have Jews in your house? I said, wow, you have beautiful eyes, man. First thing he's going to do is break down my door, go into the attic, and take out all of the Jews. So, I think that you've got to be willing to accept the consequentialist opinion in this point. You've got to be consequentialist and not just respect the rule. I'm not going to lie because that's way more important. In my opinion, it's really selfish. You can't respect your personal integrity more than someone else's life. That would be the selfish act. Your question?
So if you lie, what's the probability that they're just not going to break down the door and pick out the Jews and addicts?
Again, probability. I'm glad you brought that up. If we're looking at probability, you say, don't even look at the probability. Just assume that if you tell the truth, everything's going to work out fine. That's ridiculous. That's not upholding your moral obligation and your consequentialist obligation on both sides of the debate to try to do what's right for the other person. You should look into the future and say, if I lie and say no, these Nazis have like 10,000 houses to go through today. If I say no, they're going to be eager to move on their way and they'll look at the next house. If I say nothing, they're going to be suspicious and come in. If I say yes, I have Jews, they're going to be suspicious and come in. The only logical answer, the only right thing to do, is to do what it takes to save the Jews and be a consequentialist. I already took one question on that and don't have time for two inside. Moving on to the on case, I'll get through as many as I can in my last minutes. Flowing through what Josh said, the universality, everyone is actually a consequentialist. Again, as Josh Angelosi said, who is it actually good for? When you look at that, you have to look at the consequentialist view. When they're saying that we all have to do what's right, they then don't lay out why what's right is the best thing. Why is telling the truth better for the Jews in your attic? They don't explain how that actually works out to be more good than telling a lie and saving the Jews. If they can't explain that, consequentialism is better. Again, we look at their third argument, which they said it values life. That we say consequentialism actually values life more. They say that deontology values life. If they're willing to lie, if they're willing to maintain their integrity and sacrifice the Jews to maintain their integrity, and we're willing to tell a lie to save the Jews in the attic, who is actually respecting life more? I can't help but think that the consequentialist is the one who's valuing life, while they're only respecting their personal integrity because they want to be trusted in the future. That's the selfish thing to do. You should be willing to sacrifice your integrity in order to make sure you save the people who are going to be killed. Finally, two last points, very briefly. It was said that you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And because consequentialists can't predict the future sufficiently, all of us should be deontologists and just play it safe and do the morally right thing. The rule, follow the rule. If that's the case, I think we're actually violating that rule on both sides. Because they have no idea what's going to happen in the future either. On their side, let me just have a couple extra seconds to get through this one point. They say that we are trying to predict the future, and because we can't do that sufficiently, we shouldn't be consequentialists. But I brought it back to the original analogy of your daughter drowning on one side and the two guys drowning on the other side. Who's to say that if you went and saved those two guys over there, that your daughter might actually catch a wave and ride it back? Same thing could happen if you went and tried to save your daughter. You save your daughter, the other two guys get a wave and ride it back. You don't know exactly which one's going to happen. You project into the future the best odds you can. Maybe you'll even have time to save them both. You don't know. But you know for sure one thing. If you go save the two guys, two men will be saved, and you might have a chance of saving your daughter. If you go the other route and save just your daughter, you save one person, and you might be able to save the other two guys. In the end, I see consequentialism as valuing life more than deontology. We value life above integrity. We value life above simple rules that you hold in your conscience for whatever reason. Because of that, I urge you all to vote in favor of consequentialism. Thank you.
In the end here, I want you to remember Kant's famous line, I would rather that the entire world shall perish than commit an act of injustice. And that brings me to my first voting issue to give you a big picture why we're clearly winning the debate today. You will be voting for us today, I truly believe. Is that number one, some problems with deontology. The first major problem is that following rules hurts people. Are you going to be somebody with a deontology who always follows the rules regardless of the consequences no matter what? Or sometimes is it okay to break the rules? I have a feeling there's a few more rule breakers than rule benders sometimes than rule followers in here. Following the rules hurts people, as Kant says. You know, I'm going to follow the rule. I'm not going to tell a lie, okay? In the meantime, the entire world perishes. Or I'm not going to tell a lie, pretend I'm a terrorist. I'm rather going to let the terrorists blow up millions of innocent people, starting with your best friend. starting with your mom, with your sister, okay? So if they're talking about who helps people, deontology is what hurts people. And it's also so rational. Do you really want to be treating people rationally? Like, should I help for this person? Is it a categorical imperative? Will it be universalizable? Or do you want to go help somebody because you see them down in the field and you want to go lend them a helping hand, right? Because you're empathetic. If you're going to be doing that, then you're going to be voting for us today. The second problem with deontology here is that they give you no justification. Remember when I asked for that meta-ethical and normative justification for why is that good and whose good are we talking about? They've never been able to provide that for you. So that means that the entire moral philosophy is bumped. Let's go to the third point here, is that it's completely impractical. Remember when I was telling you that when you're going through that categorical imperative that you're never really going to know what to do? Like, is use the core going to be a good universalizable thing? Is it not? You're never going to know what to do with their whole view, right? Who's good? Whose rules are we following? So again, another reason that you're not going to be voting for deontology. Just go to my second voting issue, and that's that everybody is a consequentialist. If you ever had to make a decision and you kind of ask yourself, is this going to be good for me? Is this going to hurt me? Is this going to be good for my friend? Is this going to hurt my friend? Right? Then you are a consequentialist and you're going to be voting for us today. If you think that policy making is a good thing, where we're trying to implement policies to like promote well-being in society, that we need to go and try to bring Tony to justice so he doesn't continue to enslave slaves, then you're going to be voting for us because that's your concern about well-being. Everybody is a consequentialist, including deontologists. Remember that everything they're talking about is in light of the practical consequences, right? When they say that, hey, in the Nazi thought experiment, that we need to kind of like find another way to like, not lie to the Nazis but still save the people. What are they trying to do? They're still trying to promote well-being in that instance. Or, when they're saying that, hey, lying might lead to people not trusting you, what is that? That's a consideration of a consequence. So you see what they're doing. They're always considering the consequences and well-being. Let's go to my third voting issue here, is that we have answered every single one of their concerns in the debate today. Every single one of their critiques against consequentialism. The first is that they said that we cannot predict the future. But remember when I asked you, hey, will not drinking water, do you think that's going to harm your well-being? Will standing in front of a train tracks harm your well-being? I think pretty clearly we know sometimes, like, hey, not doing my homework, whatever it is, we can kind of predict what is likely going to happen in those instances, right? We have, that's common sense kind of thing. Now, I don't know what esoteric kind of, philosophical viewpoint they're giving you, but we can all do our best to try to promote our own well-being and the well-being of others. The second point they said is that we're going to end up willing evil, like when our own daughter is drowning, we're going to let her die so we can go save other people. We're not that stupid, people. We're going to go say, hey, lifeguard, please help, whatever, people on the beach, come and help, right? So we can save everybody. We're going to try to mitigate those conflicts. It's another argument that's been cold conceded in this round today. The third point is that they said that, we're going to be harming individuals. But remember, we're the only empathetic people. We're the only, versus them, we're only rational. And remember, that our whole point of view is to promote well-being. And let's go to a final few of these thought experiments as the last voting issue with this whole, Nazi issue. If you would tell a lie to save the people in your attic, then you're going to be voting for us today. And if you think that, hey, even sometimes telling a lie might mean that people don't trust you, and that's another consideration about whether or not we should try. When we say, hey, should we enforce a pedagogy of like punishing our kids and beating them when they do wrong things? I don't think that's in their well-being. That's another consideration for the consequence. So every single thought experiment is favoring on our side today. I believe it's a clear vote for the consequentialist side today.
I think we have 5 more minutes. If you guys can hang on, I'll make it up to you next class.
I'll make it brief. If I'm Jack Bauer, I'm up here, and I'm debating, and I'm going to do anything it takes, it means that in my first speech, I'm going to go over time. I'm going to lie and say I have an extra minute because I want to win, and that's what I'm going to do. The rules don't matter. Who cares about the rules of debate? Winning is what is most important. That is what the opposite team is arguing for. They're saying, throw the rule book out the door, we're going to do whatever it takes. And I think with the 3 voting issues that I'm going to present today, you're going to see why you're going to want to follow the rules, why you're going to say we're going to do what's right, simply because it's right. I'm going to present 3 voting issues. The first one you can tag as right. The second one, 2, and the third one is going to be tagged as life. When we look at rights, and we look at why we do the right thing, we can take an example from the life of Jesus. He was tempted. Many times he had the opportunity to do, something bad, but he always did what was right. In fact, you can see when he came to the cross, he says, why do I have to do this? You're God, you could change the plan, you could save humanity rather than me having to die on the cross. No, he stepped in, he followed the rules. We can look to the perfect example of Jesus as the ultimate example of why we should follow the rules, why we should do what is right. We can't know the future. There's no way we can know the future. We can try to predict, but that doesn't mean we're going to know the future. We need to do what is right. The second burning issue deals with the future. Take the example of DDT. DDT was a miracle cure. Here we have a chemical that can get rid of all the disease. We're going to save everybody. In fact, we handed it out everywhere. We took it to Africa. We have DDT. This is the answer. We thought we could predict the future. We thought we could solve. We could fix the consequences. We could save life. In the end, it wasn't so helpful. In fact, it caused birth defects and it ended up hurting more people than it helped. We don't always know what's going to happen. We don't always know the impacts. We need to do what's right. The third one is that of life. And I think this is where everything hinges. They say we can do everything we want because we're going to save everyone. When it comes down to it, you're not going to be able to help every single person. If every single person in this room, wants to be happy, there's going to be conflict. What happens when there is conflict? Do you torture the terrorist or you do what's right? We need to treat people as the end. People are not means. If we want to have a full life, if we want to have a happy life and really experience love, joy, peace, we have to be able to live in a world where we're not looking at people as an end to a mean. Rather, we need to look at people as valuable in and of themselves. That said, that goes to the whole framework of individuality. When we look at our country, when we look at the individual rights that we are given, from a consequential perspective, we would throw those out. Jack Barrow doesn't care about the rights of others. He cares about the general welfare. So if the mob rule, decides what's right, then we're going to go with them because they obviously know what's right. No, we need to stick to the absolute and base it on that. So in the end, when we look at that example, when we look at, if I'm going to save my daughter, I'm going to save the two strangers, they say, you know what? There's two lifeguards. I don't know where they jumped in the story, but they're not there. Stuff isn't going to work out like we want. Sometimes we're faced with a choice, such as that. And sometimes we're going to have to make the hard choices, and that is what the deontologists must do. So when you look at the arguments that they make that rules hurt people, they are hurting people because they're doing whatever it takes. They say it's logical. They're having to weigh the consequences, so obviously they're having to sit back. Will this help me in the end? They're still having to do a thought pattern. They say, what is the end? They can't clarify what is right. Blackburn got up here and he clarified it immensely. People are the end. And then finally, whose rule? Once again, that ignores the whole question. We need to look at the facts. And for that reason, I would urge you to vote for Professor Blackburn and myself. Vote
So, if you want to vote for the proposition team for deontology, raise your hand now. All right, if you want to vote for the consequentialist team, raise your hand now. Looks like deontology wins, guys. Good job. Good job.